if it's chopped up in little pieces and there's no easement or right-of-way to deal with this, that's the problem, not how many parcels you get. It's where's the space. And to me, in the area of city impact, you said the zoning regulations of the city apply, and I forgot, what were the other things that applied from the city in the area of city impact?
Yeah, the subdivision ordinance, the mobile home park ordinance, the city comprehensive plan.
Yeah, and see, it's the transportation and the public infrastructure necessarily, in the comprehensive plan, it's kind of vague, and it's not clearly delineated. So I think wanting to expand the area of city impact, and then maybe, and whether or not we do that, to define the multimodal transportation plan, this is for Gary, does it reach outside the city limits?
Be a better question for
Les? Because, in other words, what I'm trying to do is overlay the public infrastructure plans on wherever these parcels would be, and that way the people who have the parcels would have a clear idea of what would be there, and feel free to divide it how they want it.
The answer is yes, it does. It includes a projection out to 2035 based upon the growth anticipated in the city's adopted land use comprehensive plan.
And it goes beyond, does it go beyond the current area of impact?
I believe in some areas
2035 does?
that growth probably does within that 2035 window. I believe so.
So when that plan is completed, 'cause it's not completed yet, is it?
No, it'll be
Yeah.
the end of the year.
So it's going to be pretty close. So when that was completed and you overlaid that over whatever decision the county makes, then we could have orderly development and the people could divide up their land how they wanted. And taking care of the soils as well. So,
But we did also see how that ring road magic marker line on the map was received, and that was long.
oh yeah,
long-range
but
planning
there's
as
also
well,
on
so-
there, there's also on there, more realistically, the alternate 8, the southern alternate 8, east and west versions, which would be likely to happen at some point. But even, and I had asked Bill about this, about what if somebody wants to put was it D8? Is that what the company was, D8? Or something outside, business-wise, does it make a difference if you have these parcels divided up? And Bill's opinion at the time is that most of this is residential, and that's kind of the problem when it's residential, because you don't have as much control over the right-of-ways in the infrastructure as you do with commercial development, so.
Oh, lots of hands. Wayne, how about you?
Question, I think, for Mike, first of all. Mike, I think you can answer this. So, I guess three questions here. First of all, is there any lots within the city of Moscow that you know of that are on their own water and or septic system and not connected to the city?
Yeah, there's numerous in town.
And so we do allow that.
Generally, with any new home or development, we don't allow that, but there's circumstances there where maybe their septic line goes out in the future and they're able to connect to city services, but we don't actually annex them in. I know a number of these have happened on Orchard Street.
Well, but they are already annexed in the city. They're part of the city.
Okay.
But they're still on their own system?
Les might have a better answer to that. I know there's numerous wells that provide irrigation.
I understand,
Okay.
but potable water.
Les?
Where I'm coming at, Les, maybe this will be easier to answer, is if a piece of property is annexed into the city, are they required to be on city water and sewer?
They are not required initially to be on city water and sewer. The
They
city
can maintain
does-
their own system, but they are, if it fails, then they can become part of the city system.
There are a number of situations in which they can be required to be on the city system.
'Cause that goes back to my concern that I was having, was if we become and where we annex area of impact or expand the area of impact 50 years, 100 years down the road, and property becomes annexed in because of a subdivision, but there's already property on there that has its own well and sewer, would they then be required to connect to the city? Apparently not, as the way things are now. Go ahead.
If I can finish, please. The answer where I was going is that there are a number of situations in which they can be required to connect. We have within our codes provisions that state that if they're within 300 feet, if the parcel's within 300 feet of public facilities, that they can be required to extend and connect to the public system. Now, as a practice, we don't typically do that to folks. It's usually more as, you know, the mains are developed through land division or land development, and they're extended, and then it comes closer to their properties is when most people would tie in. Most people choose to tie in, but not everybody does. And there are some parcels out there who have utilities nearby who have not chosen to tie in yet.
And I think we did connect somebody on an emergency basis
We
a few
did, yeah.
years ago.
Now,
Yeah.
did I understand it correct that in the area of impact, construction has to be to city standards? Now, I'm primarily talking about, for instance, streets. Streets and right-of-way, as Sue was concerned about.
I guess my understanding of that is not necessarily
Okay.
in practice. All right. The city makes recommendations as it pertains to infrastructure, and sometimes those are followed and sometimes they are not, based on my experience.
And what brings that up is if you look at, boy, this is not going to work. The area where Tomer Road is, that lower, got a good one there?
Everybody used to use mine.
Right there. Okay, area of impact is right there, and city limits is right there. We have not annexed this into the city. And if we did, we would be annexing infrastructure that was not built to city standards. Therefore, my concern then is that as we continue to grow, we get to the point where we're annexing property in that is not to city standards, and so it becomes a liability to the city. This, I think, is complicated enough that I think we need to sit down, maybe even in a workshop with the planning department and really try to understand the ramifications of what this means for the future of Moscow. And I definitely think that we need to look at expanding the area of impact.
Walter?
Thank you, ma'am. Michelle, if I may. I think I heard you indicate that the city controls within the city area of impact. And then,
The city code applies within
Okay.
the city area of impact.
in response to Wayne's questioning about infrastructure, Les indicated that we recommend, but we don't control.
That's
I
correct.
guess my question is, which is it?
The city code applies in the Moscow area of impact. However, the county, by law, has to have the final say-so.
So we do not control. We recommend.
That is
Or can
correct.
recommend.
That is correct.
Okay, thank
And
you.
we not only can, we actually have that built into the process as a requirement of our area of impact agreement, recommendations from the city. The county building code applies in the area of impact. The county highway district is in charge of roads in the area of impact. There are places in the area of impact that are on essentially Moscow sewer, but not water. The area that Councilman Kraus pointed out is one of those. It's a much higher density area with city zoning. Most of it's R4 zoning, and that particular area has very high density development in it because of the city code applying at that location. That isn't what we're talking about outside the area of impact, because we're only talking about properties that are zoned agriculture, forest. And so if it's a different zoning designation, like the area near Tomer or Canterwood Estates, you could see formal subdivisions, which are different than land partitions, essentially.
And for Gary, I'm not sure that the city caught what Michelle talked about, which is where within the area of impact, we're under a 40-acre rule, and that what they're talking about doing would or wouldn't change that or something. I just think that ought to be under consideration is whatever recommendation y'all make to us, either now or in the near future. I personally think that we need to have some people meeting, have some people talking, have some people trying to understand this, and I'm the last one to understand it because I've never been on P&Z, and now I know why. I was smart enough not to be. But this is confusing enough even to those that seem to understand it.
If I may.
Yeah, Gary, I just want to mention, we've heard several references this evening to, would need to analyze this, really do some calculations, figure this out. And when we're talking about the prospect of being able to transfer development rights by a common owner between properties, I think we could also run into an issue where people are starting to just speculate on land and acquiring it so that there's common ownership for those kinds of things to occur. And so I think this is such a long-range planning issue that it's important that we have this, conversation. I think tonight is an excellent start. I think the conversation held by Moscow Planning and Zoning Commission the other night was an excellent start. But they also were interested in a chance to speak to with their counterparts in the county. And we've heard from some council members here tonight who would also like to have maybe a workshop, as Wayne suggests. But if this public hearing ends up happening as soon as the middle of July, we have very little time to try to get that accomplished. So if we have any sway in affecting, notice of public hearings or something like that to allow this process to play out in a more deliberative fashion and with enhanced communication between the city and the county, I think that would be helpful to all parties concerned. And I cut Gary off. Please, go ahead, and then I'll call in.
Well, just a couple of things. And I do agree with you. I think the discussion tonight, obviously, is that there's a lot of questions. Michelle indicated that from the perception of the county planning that this new rule might reduce the number of lot divisions that can occur in the ag forestry zone at this point. I think that bears additional analysis by the planning department and so on and so forth. And there have been a couple of examples of things that have been talked about tonight, as Michelle indicated. Canterwood Estates was almost solely a city project. At that point, before Blaha was handed down by the Idaho Supreme Court, city did essentially, that's a subdivision that was within the area of city impact and was regulated by the city. A little different than like Dave's Avenue. Dave's Avenue is a county subdivision, whether it's informal or whether it was actually developed as a county subdivision. Those are the issues I think that address or would be problematic from, as Wayne indicated, where you've got close clustered development served by less than city standards of infrastructure. What do you do with it? And in the 21 years I've been here, every time one of those substandard subdivisions is annexed into the city and attempts are made to bring the infrastructure up to city standards, the people who live in those subdivisions generally are not very pleased about that because they end up paying for the increased costs. So you get those situations, as Les indicated, where I've had a well on my property for 50 years and I want to keep using it, so we have people using those for irrigation, sometimes for potable water. We have septic systems going bad. The Southeast Moscow Sewer District is a good example of that, where the cluster development, the densities that Michelle was talking about, raised health concerns and were starting to affect the water. So the sewer district came into being and they negotiated with the city and came forward. We have not actually absorbed a sewer district that has failed. We have negotiated the takeover of the North Polk Sewer District, was done through a negotiated deal. It was fine, it was still viable, but it got to the point where they needed water and sewer out there. So obviously at that point, as development was surrounding them, it wasn't that big of a deal. Southeast Moscow, as you know, has discussed with the city perhaps the city taking over that district as well, the discussion that was had before the city council less than 3 years ago.